Okay, hi, I'm Casey, and welcome back to I Don't Know What I'm Doing. I do booktube content here. If you're familiar with it, you know about all the stuff you're going to see here, wrap-ups, tags, sometimes TBR, sometimes discussing TBRs, all that kind of stuff. And today I thought it would be fun to do an idea that my beautiful spouse had, which was talking about tropes that I hate, but the exceptions to that rule. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's get into it. Full transparency here, I might call these tropes something that they're not typically called by anyone else other than me, but that's how I wrote them down in my notes, and that's how I think of them, so that's what we're gonna go with. And the first one I want to start with is the oops, we're related trope. This trope typically bothers me for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's almost always really heavily foreshadowed, but still expected to be a shock to the audience or to the reader, and I find that to be incredibly annoying and obnoxious. Or it is just out of nowhere and used purely for shock value, and it can be expanded upon and made to be less of an annoyance later on, like in a book or a series, but I hate whenever it happens. I always get really annoyed by it, or almost always really annoyed by it, and the one exception I have to that I am going to fully spoil the ending for, and that is Brother by Ania Ahlborn. This, spoilers ahead, by the way, I can put a timestamp on the screen for when I'm done talking about spoilers, or down below in the description, but I am going to fully spoil a massive part of the ending of this book by talking about it, and talking about it with this trope. This is a horror novel following a cannibal family called the Morrows, and specifically the youngest brother, Michael, who is a little bit different than the rest of his family. He's a little bit more shy, he's a lot less into the whole, you know, kidnapping, murdering, and eating people aspect that his family has going on. And the trope in here of the oops, we're related trope, it happens at the very end when he finds out the girl he's had a crush on and been developing a relationship this whole time is actually his sister. What? This, I think, is done well for a couple reasons. Number one, it's so easily foreshadowed at the beginning and heavily foreshadowed, like when their relationship, like when he first meets Alice, I believe her name is, that I was fully expecting it, but I didn't think that whenever it was revealed, it was expected to be a shock to the audience. It was just expected to be a shock to Michael. You were supposed to go on this journey with Michael and Rebel as an outside perspective to kind of see what was going on in their lives, and to, you know, I thought part of the scariest part of this book was knowing what Michael was going to have to deal with as the book went on, and the horrors he was going to have to face, but he didn't know. And so as, you know, as a reader, you're sitting there and you're just being like, oh my god, this poor baby, he's going to have to deal with this, oh my god. And knowing it was going to happen and not feeling like I was expected to be surprised by it made it so much more enjoyable. Okay, and the next trope, that it's not really a trope so much as it is a genre of horror that I don't really vibe with, but I'm gonna call it a trope in here, that I typically hate, is Lovecraftian or cosmic horror. Now, the reason I don't like this is because my biggest pet peeve in reading is, and I say this as a person who's read a lot of Stephen King, so you could just imagine how much annoyance I've dealt with in my whole life, is when an author over-explains something. I hate it. And I'm talking about over-explaining a twist, a reveal, an ending, whatever. Motivation, any of it. I think everything is so much scarier when you don't actually know. I think it's so much scarier when a villain's motivations are far more ephemeral and unknowable. And that's what cosmic horror should be to me. You're dealing with entities, they're like the size of planets, that we can't even begin to fathom what they think, let alone what their motivations would be in doing something. And I feel like in so much cosmic horror, it's always given an explanation. There's always some like intermediary to try to explain it to the humans involved in the story, and I find that to be very frustrating because I don't think we should know what their motivations are. I think it makes it scarier. I have 3 examples for cosmic horror that really worked for me, and the first one is Wild Spaces by S.L. Coney. I haven't talked about this yet because I just read it this month. This is a short novella following an 11-year-old boy who lives in a lovely little village with his mother and father, and when his grandfather comes to stay, weird stuff starts happening, and weird, like, fishy stuff starts happening. This is really good because it's so short and it just sticks to the tension and the creepiness. You don't know why things are happening. You don't know how they're happening. They just are. You're thrust into the same position as the young boy in here who is unnamed, just where you don't know what's going on or why it's happening. And that's so fucking scary, and it works so well in here. My next example is Our Wives Under the Sea. This is another horror novel, and specifically another cosmic horror novel, but this follows two women who have been married, and one goes on in a deep sea expedition as a marine. I think she's a marine biologist or something like that, and the other one stays back on the shore, and then the mission and the submersible goes missing for months, and then whenever they're finally reunited and this person comes back, she's different, and it's an exploration of grief and loss and love and all of these kinds of things. And there's just this tiny little sprinkle of cosmic horror and creepiness in there. And it's so good because it's just not fucking explained. It's just left up to your imagination to imagine like what this thing is or what has happened to this woman and how it's impacted her entire life and her marriage and her spouse's life. It's amazing and it's beautiful and it just doesn't over explain itself, and it's what makes it so perfect. And then the last example I have for cosmic horror that worked for me is The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. This is everything. It's so good. This is, in my opinion, from what I've read from this author, Victor LaValle at his best. It's short, it's sweet, it's simple, it's exploring deep, personal, really relatable topics to any point in, at least the United States history, talking about racism and all its many forms and facets. And again, this is another horror novel. This is set in like the early 1920s, I believe, and we are following a man named Tom as he is just trying to live his life and provide for his family, but he gets dragged into a really gritty, dark world that is, and I say world as like an underworld of society, not like a different universe. And as he begins to kind of slowly just become a part of this world. And it's so good. It's so short. It spends all the time it needs on the important parts without trying to over-explain what's happening or the why or the how. And I love that about it, and it makes it so perfect. And this is the kind of cosmic horror that works well for me. The next trope I'm going to discuss, I wrote down my notes in a really ridiculous way, and it's they're 700, I'm 25, here's our love story. And the thing that I hate about this is I don't think a 700-year-old being that presumably is immortal could fall in love with a 25-year-old or younger, or human of any kind, let's be honest here. It's so silly. I'll talk about this a little bit more later because I have a different trope that is very similar but not quite the same in my eyes. I feel like beings that have lived ages and ages and ages that are probably beyond human empathy and conscience and just morality in general aren't gonna fall in love with a mortal that still has to go through all the baby steps. But here are the two examples where I think it works well. And the first one is Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Part of this main story is the difficulty that Louis has with Lestat. They don't really mesh. Louis has to go through all the steps of, I'm a vampire now, and I have to deal with feeding myself and what my conscience says, and Lestat's inability to empathize with him in that, and the way that, again, I need to tell you a freaking synopsis for this. I'm so bad at that. Just go right into talking about my thoughts. This is an older vampire novel. Let me see when it was initially published. 1976, if you're not familiar with this. I'm sorry. I'm happy you're hearing about it today. This is following Louis, who is a young man in the French Quarter, I believe, in New Orleans, as he is turned into a vampire by a vampire named Lestat, and it is their story of their undead lives together and what happens with them. And then eventually a young girl named Claudia is also introduced, and that is the part of this story that I think makes it work right? Is that Lestat can't relate to Louis, and he can't understand why he can't get over his need to feed himself and his love for these humans. And when Claudia is introduced, it shows how abusive and horrible Lestat is, and how awful he truly is, pulling these two people together and forcing them into this life that neither of them really asked for. And I think it works in here because it shows that that kind of relationship would be so hard. And it's, even if you fell in love, if you're a 700-year-old vampire or whatever, and you fall in love with a mortal, you're not gonna have a lot to relate to. It's gonna be a very difficult thing until you can kind of meet at the same level of your your just mentality. And I love it in here because the entire dysfunctional nature of the relationship is what this is about. On that same note, another thing I love is A Dowry of Blood, and this is very similar. This is another horror novel following Dracula's wife, Constanza, I believe, and except Dracula is not being named in here, and it is her telling her story and their love story. And again, it is talking about how that dynamic doesn't really meet and doesn't really work. It's when you are an older, almost borderline eldritch being, you can't relate to the whims and the follies that a mortal has. And it's so beautiful and it's so great. And that's why that works in there. Again, is just exploring why it wouldn't work in general. The next trope that I'm going to talk about is the science is bad trope. I particularly find this annoying for one major reason. I think it's typically included in a lot of books because it's just I can be blunt in how I say this, I am. It's a right-wing dog whistle. Let's be honest here. Something like Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak. The whole thing of like, oh, the two parents that are atheists and super science forward are actually the bad people that transed a kid for, their own nefarious purposes. I don't really think I have to explain that much more, but I think it's often in books because there is supposed to be this element of like making you question science and making you question the validity and the accuracy of it without the knowledge behind that, because like questioning things is all about what science is. You're supposed to question things and find out about them and learn and all this kind of stuff. But it is, through scientific process and method that you find the answers to that, not just internet searches that tell you that vaccines aren't real. I'm just gonna say it. And one of the books I really love where this trope is there is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Now, why does this work? Because it's saying that the science is bad, but the reason the science is bad is due to human folly and human greed. And it's the science is real. And it worked. And it's the thing that makes it terrible. And again, this is another older novel that is very popular in pop culture. The thing about this is that it's human greed. It's human greed, plain and simple. I believe Ian Malcolm is a character in here. And at least in the movie, I can't remember if it's in the novel because I read this 15 years ago, he says something along the lines of, you were too busy asking yourself if you could to ask yourself if you should. And that's the kind of message I like in here that I think Michael Crichton's really good at delivering. Again, a synopsis. This is a science fiction novel following the creation of Jurassic Park because science has learned how to clone dinosaurs from like DNA found in amber and fossils, and it ends up going disastrously. And you're following a group of archaeologists and a mathematician who's fascinated by chaos theory and a couple of kids as they try to escape. And again, I just like it in here because it's more of a discussion on human nature and less so that, oh, the science was actually really evil the whole time. I'm gonna get really sassy about it because I fucking hate that. Okay, the next trope I want to talk about is the mortal/immortal falling in love trope. I find this to be so annoying. I hate it. I don't think it works. I discussed earlier when I talked about this, but there is just something about the whole like a love story between a mortal and an immortal that just doesn't sit right with me, and I think it's just the massive fucking age gap. And I find it to be really annoying, to be quite honest with you, because I'd never find it that believable. I think falling in lust with someone, that makes sense to me. turning them, doing all that kind of stuff, that all makes sense to me as far as vampire fiction is concerned, but for the most part I just find it to be completely impractical and silly and really frustrating. Now, 2 examples where this works for me. The first one is Let the Right One In. This is another vampire novel. I'm keeping it turned to the side because the camera really just wants to focus on the young woman's face on the front of the cover. This is a vampire novel following young Oscar as he is meeting a new friend, and Oscar does not have a lot of friends, and he is a very young boy, and he is dealing with a lot of bullying and a lot of really not great stuff in his home life. And a young girl and her father move into his apartment complex, and he begins a friendship with her, and it's an unlikely pairing and love story, and it's really just a beautiful fucking book and movie. The original, I haven't seen the American version. But the reason it works in here is it's a love story, but they're not in love with each other. That is one of my favorite kinds of love stories, is it's a platonic love, and it is a relationship where our young vampire sees Oscar and sees in him the potential for friendship, which this person has had to, use all their vampire wiles their whole life to get people to try to help take care of them and clean up their messes because they're not good at that. But Oscar really just likes them for them, and that's beautiful. And Oscar feels seen and he feels protected, which he has in a lot of his life. And that's the kind of love story I really like, and that I think works well for that dynamic, because that makes sense to me, that you could develop a friendship, but a romantic, intimate relationship with an immortal being just doesn't jive with me. I know it does with a lot of people, and a lot of people like that, but I hate it, and this works so well for me. And then the next example I have is The Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is following a young woman and a Mayan death god as they embark on a journey together to help him reclaim his godhood in the Jazz Age. So this is 1930s, I believe, Mexico City, or something like that. This is just, it's beautiful. And while there is a romantic component to their love there, to me, this works because you have a god of death who is turning more and more human every day. That's part of their journey, is to restore him to his godhood, but the longer he's away from it, the more mortal he becomes. And he is turning into just a person who can feel love like a person does, and who can feel all the emotions that people can, but that gods wouldn't really give 2 fucks about or be privy to. And it's beautiful in here, and it works so well, and it's just an excellent, excellent book. And I also just really love this author, and I don't think she's written a bad thing that I've read, at least. Okay, that's it. That's some tropes that I hate, with exceptions to that rule. I hope you had fun with this. This was fun for me to discuss. Thank you to my beautiful, wonderful spouse for suggesting this idea. This was really, really fun. If you like this video, please feel free to algorithm things down below. And if you enjoyed this video, tell me if you want to see me do this the opposite way, of tropes that I love, but books that I hate that have this in it. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you next Friday. Bye.